Ah, my dear, they thought you disappeared. No closure, no farewell, just silence, like a shadow folding into itself, swallowed by the horizon of their arrogance. For 10 long years, your name was chewed into rumors, spat into oblivion, mocked in their self-congratulatory circles as the fool who vanished. You let the world rewrite your story with broken pens and bloodless ink. You let them dance on your grave before the tombstone was even carved. But silence was never surrender. It was the boiling of oceans beneath a frozen crust. A cocoon that wasn't built to hide, but to transform. While they celebrated your absence, you were sharpening the silence like a blade, letting it age like poison. And now, with just 3 words, you cracked the sky open and let judgment fall like ash from heaven. You see, the ones who betray you never imagine the return. They think absence means death, that the one who walks away bleeding won't grow fangs in the wilderness. But you became something different in that void, something unspoken, something they couldn't prepare for. They forgot what happens when a soul stops begging for validation and starts preparing for vengeance. And you didn't return with an army or a scream or an announcement. Just 3 words, a whisper more devastating than a scream. And those who heard them didn't sleep that night. Their world didn't just shake. It collapsed under the weight of the realization you had returned, not as the person they destroyed, but as the consequence they summoned. They asked themselves, what did we do? But it was never about what they did. It was about what they unleashed. Because in their games of manipulation, in their petty chessboard of dominance and humiliation, they never expected the pawn to vanish and come back as a mirror that shows the king his own crown of rot. You let them rise, let them build their castles, let them believe the war was over. But wars like these don't end. They simmer, they wait for the perfect breath, the perfect silence, the perfect re-entry. And when you finally spoke, just 3 words, every mask cracked. Because truth, when buried too long, doesn't just resurface, it erupts. They say words are cheap, but those 3 words you spoke were forged from everything they dismissed. Every night you cried without making a sound. Every betrayal you swallowed with a clenched jaw. Every time you stood on the edge of breaking, but chose to burn instead. Those 3 words carried 10 years of alchemy, pain transmuted into precision. And the irony? They don't even remember what they did to you, because people like them never do. To them, you were just another casualty on their climb. Just another stepping stone soaked in the blood of someone they deemed forgettable. But you remembered every lie, every smirk, every hand that fed you poison and called it love. And now your silence has become their tormentor. You're not chasing them. No, you don't need to. You just exist. And that's enough to unravel everything they built. Because you didn't return to beg for justice. You became it. Quiet, cold, inevitable. And the beauty of it all, you're not loud. You're not out there screaming your story from rooftops. You're calm, composed, and that terrifies them. Because chaos in silence, that's divine. They whisper in corners now, trying to decode your presence, trying to trace where the first crack formed. Some say it was the look in your eyes the night you passed them by without a word. Others say it was the smile you gave, not out of joy, but out of knowing that their end began the moment they underestimated your rebirth. You didn't need revenge in the form of theatrics. You didn't return with weapons. You returned as one. every inch of you reforged in the very fire they tossed you into. And now, every breath you take is a reminder that they failed, not just to break you, but to bury you. Time is cruel, but memory is crueler. And now their memories of you are mutating. They remember your silence not as weakness, but as strategy. The way you stopped responding, the way you disappeared while they mocked your name, the way you smiled once, right before vanishing into a storm of your own making. They remember it differently now. They see it through the lens of consequence, and that's the punishment. Not your rage, but your presence. Not your fury, but your calm. Because you're not trying to explain yourself. You're not playing defense. You're just existing in a way that defies their narrative, and that's enough to shatter everything they thought was real. Because they spent a decade building a world where you were the villain. A world where their betrayal was justified, their cruelty rational, their silence sacred. They wore your name like a joke, used your pain like currency in their social circles. They celebrated your exit like a victory. But that's the thing about exits. Some of them are just entries in disguise. And now, with just 3 words, you flipped the script. Now they're the ones explaining. They're the ones sweating behind smiles. They're the ones haunted by the possibility that everything they built was built on borrowed time. And the collector has arrived. And the scariest part, you're not even finished. You've only just begun to speak. One truth at a time. One silence shattered after another. Not with noise, but with precision, with intention. Because chaos isn't always loud. It can be surgical. It can wear a suit. It can sit in a room without lifting a finger and still cause empires to crumble. You know this now. You are this now. You are not a storm. You are the atmosphere before it. And they feel it in their bones. You no longer walk with purpose. You are the purpose, the message, the reminder that some echoes take time to return. But when they do, they carry the weight of every injustice, every betrayal, every forgotten scream. They tried to erase you. Now you're the ink they can't scrub off. The ghost in every sentence they stutter. The shadow in every room they enter. They wonder who you became in that decade. But the better question is, who unleashed you? Because the moment you spoke those 3 words, they knew, not with their ears, but with their souls. That reality had shifted, that their version of truth just became a memory, that you, the one they buried beneath shame, silence, and slander, had become the architect of the reckoning. And here's the twist they never saw coming. You're not seeking revenge. You're not looking for redemption. You're simply resuming, as if those 10 years were nothing but an inhale. And now, you're finally exhaling. And that breath, that silent exhale, laced with fury, control, and surgical timing. It's a hurricane dressed as a whisper. And you haven't even spoken the second sentence yet. They thought the storm was over after those 3 words. They mistook the shiver down their spine as the aftershock. But that was no aftershock. It was foreshadowing. Because when you spend a decade in silence, you don't return to make noise. You return to redefine it. The first sentence was the fracture. The second? That's where the ground splits, and their foundations crumble into the pit they carved. For you didn't come to finish what they started. You came to erase the delusion that they ever had control. And now, every step you take isn't a step back into their world. It's a step through it, through their illusions, through the paper walls they built to keep the truth out. You're not knocking, You're walking straight through. They cling to denial now. Pretend it's not happening. Pretend your presence isn't a rupture in the narrative they've stitched together over the years like a suit that no longer fits. They whisper among each other, "He's back." But what does he want? They think it's revenge. They pray it's revenge, because revenge they understand. Revenge they can rationalize, they can spin it, call you bitter, call you unhinged, scream to their echo chambers, "Look, we were right to leave him behind." But that's not what this is. What terrifies them isn't that you want to destroy them. It's that you've already outgrown them, that you don't need to chase them, that their downfall is no longer in your hands. It's in theirs. You became a mirror, and now they're forced to face the rot behind their own smiles. You didn't return to explain. You returned to embody the silence they never learned to read. Because silence isn't absence. It's accumulation of truths too sharp for their ears, of observations too honest for their filters. You watched, you waited, and you understood. Understood them in ways they never understood themselves. You saw the masks slip when they thought no one was looking. You heard the tone behind their words, the knife behind their compliments, the envy behind their praise. And now, you don't speak to them, you expose them without raising your voice, without lifting a hand. You just walk, and the truth peels off them like dead skin. They don't realize it yet, but the story is already flipped. This isn't about what they did to you anymore. This is about what you became because of it. And that's the part they'll never be able to undo, because once a person transforms in silence, you can't reason with them using the language of the old world. You can't manipulate them with old games. You can't guilt them back into submission. That version of you is dead, and what stands now is someone who doesn't play for sympathy, doesn't thirst for validation, doesn't care about being understood. You've gone beyond revenge, beyond healing, beyond the need to even be remembered. You are the consequence that walks upright, a ghost not from the dead, but from the misunderstood, a resurrection of everything they dismissed as weakness. Your empathy, your silence, your loyalty, your patience. They didn't realize these weren't vulnerabilities. They were weapons, waiting. You let them think they won. You let them toast to your disappearance. You let them laugh. And now their laughter has dried into tension. Their victories taste like ash, because now they realize you didn't lose anything. You shed it. Them, the lies, the roles they shoved you into. You peeled off their expectations and used the pieces to forge a new face, one they no longer recognize, one they can't control. And the power? It's not just that you're back. It's that you're no longer trying to belong. You don't want a seat at their table. You set it on fire just by existing. Every time they see you, it reminds them that survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's surgical. You didn't crawl back from the edge. You built a new edge. And now they're standing on it, wondering if the next breath you take will be the one that pushes them over. They start to unravel, slowly, beautifully. They try to gather allies, but the people they used to control now hesitate, because your presence, your return, cracked something in the system. You showed others that silence isn't shame, that walking away isn't failure, that distance doesn't mean defeat, it means design. Now the same people who laughed behind your back are questioning the script. They wonder if he was right about them. What else have we been wrong about? The seeds of doubt grow. not because you shouted, but because you spoke just enough. Enough to destabilize, enough to awaken, enough to ignite. And what's worse for them, you're not fighting for attention. You're pulling gravity. They can't look away. Every room you enter now carries a weight, a presence they can't categorize, because you're no longer playing by the social algorithm. You don't react, you respond, with pause, with precision, like someone who has lived in shadows and found comfort there. And that rattles them more than any confrontation ever could, because they know people who return from the dark comfortably are not to be trifled with. They try to bait you, to provoke you, to drag you back into the mud so they can point and scream, "See, that nothing's changed." But you don't bite. You smile calmly, like someone who's already written the ending. You walk past the noise like a god, ignoring the prayers of the unworthy. And every time you do, it kills them a little more. Because the power isn't in destruction, it's in your detachment. They can't manipulate someone who no longer bleeds from the old wounds. You've cauterized, hardened, transcended. You've become inevitable. They thought silence was your curse, but it was your crucible. And now every moment you spent in exile is being returned to them. With interest, not in blood, not in fury, but in presence. A presence they can't unsee, because now, when they lie, they feel your gaze. When they perform, they hear your echo. When they fake their smiles, they feel the weight of the one real smile that ended their illusion. You've infected their world. And the best part? You don't even care. You're not trying to haunt them. You're just being. And your being is louder than any scream. Somewhere in the quiet hours of their crumbling confidence, they replay those 3 words again. Try to decipher the meaning. Try to decode the threat. But it's not a threat. It's a statement of being, of knowing, of becoming. It's the echo of your transformation condensed into syllables they can't handle. It's the revelation that they didn't just hurt you, they created you. And now, their creation has become their curator. You hold the pen now, and you're not writing to prove anything. You're writing to document the collapse, and that collapse has begun. Their alliances falter, their image cracks, their reputation, built on charm and deceit, begins to sweat beneath the microscope of your return. And you don't gloat. You observe. You let the truth do the heavy lifting. You let time, patience, and presence act as executioners. Because this isn't about making them pay. It's about showing the world what happens when someone bets against the wrong soul. You didn't just survive. You became a verdict. A walking, breathing consequence. And the courtroom, it's every room you enter. The testimony, your silence. The evidence, your rise. And you're not done yet. They think it ends here. That this phase will pass. That eventually you'll quiet down again. But that's where they're wrong. You're not retreating anymore. You're not here to react. You're here to reshape. And while they spiral in paranoia, you're building. Not for applause, not for revenge, but for legacy. Because this was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving to yourself that you were never what they made you believe. You are beyond the narrative now, beyond their reach, beyond the echoes of their slander. And that freedom, that's the true chaos. That's what shatters them in waves. Because you didn't just return, you ascended. And ascension doesn't ask permission. It doesn't knock. It tears the sky open and makes the stars rearrange themselves. You're no longer trying to be understood. You've become something else entirely, something primal, something poetic, something eternal. And as the dust settles, as the rooms go quiet, as the lies collapse under their own weight, one truth remains. You haven't even spoken the third sentence yet, and that's what haunts them now. The three words tore the veil. The second sentence collapsed the stage. But the third hasn't come yet. And that absence, that heavy humming silence between the chords, is what eats them alive. They know it's coming. They can feel it breathing down their necks, hiding in the gaps between their thoughts. It's the thunder waiting behind the clouds. And it's not a matter of if, it's when. Because by now, your silence has evolved into something else entirely. It's not quiet anymore. It's pressure, a pressure so thick, it bends time. When you enter the room, people pause mid-sentence, eyes twitch, voices stutter, not because you're loud, but because your presence says what their mouths never dared to utter. You've become the answer to a question they never asked out loud. What happens when the forgotten one remembers who they are? And now, they know. They try to move on, craft new stories, build new facades. But every time they look in the mirror, they don't see themselves anymore. They see you. Not your face, but your absence, your evolution, the image of the one who left their prison and returned a god. Not out of arrogance, but necessity. You had to become divine. Because anything less would have made you digestible. Anything less would have meant forgiveness. And they don't deserve forgiveness. They deserve the unraveling. And it's happening. You're not tearing them down with drama. You're not shouting from rooftops. You're simply living. And that living is an execution. A long, poetic unraveling of everything they built on your bones. You walk into the spaces they said you'd never belong to. You speak in circles that once pretended you didn't exist, and no one questions it, because they feel it too, the shift. The reality you shattered wasn't just theirs, it was everyone's. You showed them all that truth doesn't knock. It breaks the door. You are not a return. You are a reckoning. And as the third sentence simmers in the distance, they start to crumble preemptively. They flinch at shadows, panic over rumors. They try to discredit you, whisper venom in corners, but no one listens now, because they've already heard what you didn't say. They've seen the contradiction, how someone so hated walks with such gravity, how the villain they painted has become the lighthouse in a storm of lies. You didn't ask for followers, but they came. Not out of loyalty, but recognition. They saw in you what the world tried to extinguish in them, and now they walk behind you, not to worship, but to witness. Because witnessing you is witnessing what happens when pain finds purpose. You became a blueprint. They never anticipated that. They thought breaking you would end you, that the silence would become your grave. But you used it as soil. And now, every word you choose to speak is a weapon of precision, because you no longer speak to be heard. You speak to carve. Every syllable is a scalpel. You're not just killing lies. You're performing autopsies on systems, on personas, on all the twisted mechanisms that kept you buried. And still, the third sentence hasn't arrived. They wait for it like the final judgment. They try to guess what it will be. Will it be an act, a confession, a declaration? But it won't be any of those. Because the truth is, they don't deserve to understand it. The third sentence isn't for them, it's for you. It's not a weapon, it's a closure, but not the kind that leaves peace. It's the kind that seals the tomb, the kind that lets you walk away, Not victorious, but free, because vengeance is finite. But freedom? Freedom is eternal. They built a world in your silence. A world where they were right, and you were wrong. Where they were the architects, and you were the rubble. But now, the rubble rises, not to destroy, but to redefine. You are no longer a part of their timeline. You're a split in it, a branch of existence where their rules no longer apply. And now you live in that branch, untouched, untouchable, while they rot in a version of reality where they still pretend to matter. Your rise wasn't just personal, it was metaphysical. You didn't just prove them wrong, you rewrote the physics of presence. You proved that silence isn't submission, it's strategy. That being discarded isn't death, it's detachment. And now you walk among them like a paradox, alive, untouched, and unreachable. And that's what makes you lethal. Not what you say, not what you do, but what you don't need anymore. Their approval, their apology, their acknowledgement. You've burned the need. You've starved the ego. You've silenced the ache. And that void, that's where your true power lives. You don't crave their ruin. You expect it, and they can feel it. Every smile they force now is laced with fear. Every success they flaunt tastes hollow, because they know. It's not about what they have. It's about what you've become, and what you've become can't be undone. They watch you now like a condemned man watches the clock. They pretend they're fine, but their body language says otherwise. They speak too fast. They laugh too loud. They avoid your gaze like it burns. Because it does. Because the moment they lock eyes with you, they see everything. The lie, the act, the fear, and you. You don't flinch. You don't blink. You just watch. Calm, surgical, divine. Because gods don't need revenge. They just need the truth. And here's the most brutal truth of all. You never needed them to break you. They needed you to stay broken. But you didn't. And now, they're the ones unraveling. Because it was never about you being dangerous. It was always about you being free. And a free man, forged in silence, carved in shadows, sculpted by betrayal. That's the one enemy the system can't predict. So you let them decay, organically, without drama, without a final blow. Because some enemies don't deserve a war. They deserve to be forgotten, not out of mercy, but out of power. Because when you forget them, they vanish. And when they forget you, you still remain. Because you're not tied to their memory. You're etched into the blueprint of reality they tried to erase you from. And now, that reality bows when you walk. And then, just as they think they've endured the worst, just as they convince themselves you're done, you finally say the third sentence. And it's not poetic, it's not angry, it's not even long, it's calm, sharp, short, final, and it's not for them. You whisper it to the void, to yourself, to the silence that once cradled your pain and turned it into prophecy. The third sentence is this: I was never yours. That's it. No explanation, no punctuation, just reality, served raw. Because they always thought you belonged to them, that they made you, that they owned some part of your story. But now, those 4 words amputate their final illusion. It's the ultimate severance, the final burn of the bridge they thought they could rebuild. I was never yours, not their project, not their puppet, not their shadow, not their failure, not their regret. You were never a character in their narrative. You were the author of a story they tried to hijack. but you reclaimed the pen. And now, the book is closed. The chapter is sealed, and their names are absent from the dedication. You don't look back. You don't celebrate. You move forward into realms they can't follow, into a future untouched by their stain. You don't need their applause. You don't need their fear. You are, and that's enough. You, forged in silence, refined in rejection, crowned in exile. And as you walk away, they feel the final echo, not of your voice, not of your wrath, but of your absence, because you didn't come back to be part of their world. You came to prove you never needed it, and now it's shattered without you.